Welcome to the Drone Camps channel. We do lots of tutorials, reviews, and drone news. So if that's what you're looking for, and if you're looking for information on how to set up your drone and different types of tuning videos, you will find a lot of that type of information here. Today, we're gonna talk about basic setup for the ultimate beginner getting into FPV. If you just bought a drone, this video is going to be great for you because we're going to do this video that will kind of appeal to the average guy, and we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of super technical details and have you falling asleep in this video. So that is our goal today, but our number one goal is to help you set up your drone and get you off the ground and flying. Now, before we get started, you need to do several things, and at this point you should have done the things in this checklist. I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen now. The first thing that you need to do is install Betaflight, the latest version of Betaflight and the drivers. You want to go over to betaflight.com, click on download, and that will bring you to Betaflight Configurator, the latest release or the latest version. So click that and it will take you to the GitHub page. You're going to scroll down until you see something that says assets on here. There's quite a bit of information on here, so just keep scrolling till you get to the very bottom and you'll see contributors, assets, and then you can pick your operating system. It supports Linux 64, Mac OS, and Windows 64. So go ahead and download your installer and install your drivers and restart your computer. Once you've done that, you will also want to have a USB cable that fits your flight controller, whether it's a USB-C or an Android cable, and it has to be a data cable. Otherwise, it will not connect to Betaflight, and for some unknown reason, that is a lot of people's problem. They can't connect the quad to Betaflight, and that's usually the number one reason why your quad won't connect. So make sure it's a data cable. Number 3 is have your props removed from your drone. Make sure that all your props are off your drone before you start plugging in batteries and doing anything inside Betaflight, inside the house. Number 4 is have your radio, battery, and FPV goggles ready to go and have them all fully charged up for this tutorial. And number 5, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later, it's have one roll of masking tape or painter's tape available right on the bench where you're working. And number 6 is that you want to already have your receiver bound to your radio, and you should have a green light on FreeSky radio receivers, as well as a blue light on ELRS and a green light on Crossfire receivers. Those are the most 3 popular receivers in the FPV community. So once you have it bound up to your radio and you're seeing those lights on your receiver, it should be a solid light, not a blinking light. You should be good to go. So now that you've bound up your radio to your quad, let's go ahead and plug in the USB-C or Android style cable to your flight controller. And this is a data cable, remember? So we're gonna open up Betaflight, and sometimes you can do automatically connect and it will open up to this first setup page right here. If you see calibrate accelerometer grayed out right here, it means that the accelerometer is not checked on inside the configuration tab. And we're just going to go ahead and enable the accelerometer, go to the configuration tab, 2 tabs down, and look for system configuration. Turn on the accelerometer. You don't need to turn on barometer or magnometer. Go ahead and save and reboot. And right now we're working on this quad without having a battery plugged in. So at this point, you don't need to plug in your battery. We'll get to that a little bit later. So make sure that your quad is on a stable and level surface. If it looks like it's a little bit off on this screen, in the setup screen, that means you need to calibrate your accelerometer. So we're gonna go ahead, click calibrate accelerometer. We're not gonna move the quad. Now that's nice and level. And what I want you to do now is take your quad, turn it towards you with the back facing you, and you're going to click reset Z axis. Once you do that, it will bring the quad rear facing you. So you're going to tilt it backwards first, tilt it forward, left, and right. So we're going to do this with every single quad you do setup for, and that will be one of the first things you do. So that all looks good. Every single axis is turning the right way. If it turns the wrong way when you test this on the screen, that means that your flight controller is likely turned to 90 degrees or 180 degrees, and you can reconfigure that in the configurator, but we'll go down that road a little bit later. So the next thing we need to do is go to ports. We need to see which port your receiver is wired up to. Now, this can be the part of this tutorial that's really confusing for some people. So I'm going to try to simplify this as best I can. Depending on what type of receiver you have too, if it's a serial style receiver, you're going to have to turn on the serial RX whichever UART it's on right here inside Betaflight. So I know that my receiver is wired up to UART 2. So I'm gonna come over here, Serial RX, I'm gonna turn that on, go ahead and save and reboot. And since I've already bound up my receiver to my radio, now we can check that. And depending on the type of quad you have, let's go ahead and turn on the radio.
Welcome to HTX.
Depending on what type of quad you have, sometimes the receiver will not show up in the channel maps moving until you plug in a battery. And so if you don't see them moving at first, the first thing I do is I usually just plug in a battery, then I plug in the USB cable, and then I go to the radio tab here, down receiver tab, and see if anything's moving. Now right now you see on the screen right here, I don't have anything set up, and I'm doing this from bare bones minimum right here. We know it is a serial style receiver. There are several other receiver types here, and if you have a built-in receiver, something that's built into the flight controller, it's called an SPI RX. So you want to select SPI RX for that, and then do the drop-down menu to whichever type of receiver you have built in. Sometimes there are ELRS ones as well. You can select Express LRS for that if you are using a built-in Express ELRS receiver on your flight controller. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get out of SPI RX because most people are using serial UART style receivers, and right now I have TBS Crossfire on there, so I'm going to select CRSF in this next tab here, serial receiver provider. And the same thing for ELRS. If you're using ELRS, you're going to select CRSF. It's the same. So now we can restart, but before we do that, if you're using something like a FreeSky, say an S-Bus style receiver, you want to select S-Bus down here for the FreeSky type of folks. So we're going to go ahead and select CRSF next, again because we have TBS Crossfire, and we're going to go ahead and save and reboot. And now we're going to go to the ports. We're going to double check that UART2 is on. So if this point you go down to the receiver and something's not moving, or it looks like this on the screen, what I want you to do is go ahead and scroll down to where it says channel map. Select this and go down and just try a few of these here. We're going to select AETR. You can see that the default was not matching up, so we're going to save right there, and you see the quad automatically stopped flipping around, and now it seems to be right. We can check our sticks by grabbing the radio. If we move the roll stick to the right, you should see that roll on the top bar go all the way to the right and go left, just like that. Okay, now we're going to do pitch, should go up and down just like that, and then for yaw, left and right should look like that, and throttle should be just like that. So AERT right there from the top to the bottom there, and our channel map is set to AETR. Now I have done this manually inside the radio, and you don't need to do that now with Betaflight because you can just change it right here in the channel map. So make sure all those are moving, and also at this point you should have set up a couple switches. That's a whole different type of video. I'm going to show you how to set up some modes in this video because we are doing Betaflight setup. So we're going to go ahead now and save, and you should see things moving now. If you don't, a great tip for you is to figure out which your receiver is, your signal wires are soldered up to. Now it should be RX1, and it should be TX1 if you're doing UART1, and RX2, TX2. ELRS receivers have 2 signal wires on them, so they're going to have 2 wires to solder to a TX and RX on the flight controller. Now, if you don't see any movement here, if you tried all of these ports and you go through them on the screen one at a time, sometimes I'll just go through all of these all the way down to the last one until I see it moving in the receiver tab. Now, if you never get that working, here is another thing that you can do. Go back to your flight controller, open up your quad, and reverse the TX and RX wires. Sometimes when I do that, it automatically starts working on the port that I soldered it to. So check the port that you soldered it to on the flight controller, RX1 and TX1, switch those two and it should start working. So that's a huge tip for guys. It's got me working so many times with Crossfire and ELRS, and sometimes I think it's my ELRS radio settings, maybe the receiver is not compatible with the module, things like that, but it was actually the two signal wires. So switch those, and sometimes it will automatically, you just got it wrong in the soldering, and sometimes from the factory it could be wrong as well. So switch those two wires as a quick tip. So we're going to go ahead and save and reboot now, and we know that inside the receiver tab things are working properly. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to configuration. Now you're going to scroll down to RX lost and RX set right here, D-Shot beacon configuration. I like to turn that on because what that is an ESC style beeper. Some quad that you get may not come with a physical beeper. So we're going to go ahead and save and reboot there. Now we're going to come back out and back in. And also, you know, I should have said this in the very beginning, but up at the very top right hand corner, make sure that enable expert mode is checked on, because you won't see a lot of these columns on the left show up. Some of them you will need for this tutorial. So go ahead and enable expert mode there. Now we're going to go back down to configuration again, and we're going to scroll down till we see arming. I want you to set arming to 180 right here. So I'm going to just set it, and that will allow us to do things like turtle mode. If it's on 25, you need to set it to 180 for turtle mode to be able to work. Now air mode is checked, that is good. If you have GPS, you're going to turn that on. That's kind of a whole different tutorial, and this is just basic Betaflight for you to get your quad flying. LED strips on. OSD, we need to have that turned on. We don't have to have soft serial on for this type of receiver setup. And everything over here in the beeper configuration, this is totally up to you. All this stuff right here is usually checked on. I'm going to leave that all on and go ahead and save and reboot. Now again, like, go back to the configuration tab. If you had your quad moving the wrong direction, like I mentioned earlier in the setup, this is where you can change the flight controller alignment. So go to board and sensor alignment. Roll is pitch and yaw by degrees. So say that your quad is, your flight controller is turned 90 degrees. You would need to turn it back to 0 on the yaw axis. If it's turned on the horizontal, say left to right, or it's turned around 180. And what you do is you're going to flip from, say, -90 to 0 to 180 to 90, depending on which way it's facing. And you go back to the setup to check every single time. So see, it looks like it's wrong right here, but if you click reset Z axis again from the rear, and with the quad facing you from the rear, everything is right. So don't get confused by that. So let's go ahead and go to power and battery. On this one, we want to have onboard ADC set so that we have current battery voltage showing up on the screen, as well as here's a tip as well. If you turn on your OSD and you see that your battery voltage is wrong, you can adjust it in the voltage meter values right here. So on the scale right here, it says 110 right now. Now I can adjust this up and down here, just moving it up and down with the arrows, and you will see the OSD change. Now it helps to have a battery checker plugged into your current voltage on your batteries tab right here, which is the balance port. So plugging in a battery checker here will show you the actual voltage of this battery, and once you calibrate it to Betaflight, you'll see the current voltage will be calibrated to your batteries. So that's super important. I'm going to leave that at 110 right there, and I'm going to press save. And minimum cell voltage, that usually is about 3.5. See, if you go much below 3.5 on LiPos, it will start to damage. So it's going to give me minimum cell voltage, maximum cell voltage is at 4.3, depending on whether you have LIHV or regular. Now we're going to go down to failsafe, and you always want to have failsafe set to drop right here. So that's good. Presets, it depends on which type of goggles you're using. If you're using HD, say something like DJI goggles, or you're using the Avatar HD, you can select this right here, and this right here will help your OSD show up inside your goggles if you're not getting it with the standard setup for Betaflight settings. Now, if you are on a version of Betaflight, if your flight controller has a version of firmware on there from, say, 2022 or 2021, maybe it's an older flight controller, this may not show up. You may have to update your firmware to get some of these newer presets for HD OSD to show up. So very important there that you might have to actually update your quad now, the quad's firmware. So we're going to go down to modes now. We're going to go ahead and get into modes here. Now, usually I like to set this flat switch on my Boxer to my arm switch. And right here, if there was nothing selected, if it said auto, we're just going to make that auxiliary 1. And this is how I do it. You can do it completely different. Now, for my first mode, I like to put angle mode on there because I like to sometimes take off an angle, fly up, full stability, and then switch into acro. So I have my aux2 set to my first flight mode, which is stability mode, otherwise known as angle. When I flip to my second position, you see that gold bar right there move, and now it's in kind of no space zone right here. This no space zone, that means that you're in full acro mode with no stability. So it took me a while to figure out when I was a beginner, where is acro mode? Because acro mode doesn't actually exist in this list right here. So it's kind of hiding from you, if you will. Now, if you want to add horizon, let's just do this for an example. We'll put aux2 here. And now if I don't save this, see how it's not going to actually activate. So once we click save, now you see horizon turn gold when I go to my second switch position. Now if I go all the way to position 3 over here on the right, now I'm in acro mode again. And if you want to delete one of your modes, there's a little tiny X over here, click that, and that will delete horizon. Okay, so now we have angle mode, and position 2 and 3, I have acro mode. And that's usually the way I like to do that. Now failsafe, you can add failsafe on a switch too if you want your quad to drop, if you had a flyaway or something like that. aux3 is over here on my SC switch, and I have aux3 set to beeper. And I usually put it on all the way out on position 3, but if you wanted to, you can slide these bars around and you can actually make your beeper happen on 2. Don't put it on 1 because it'll beep as soon as you plug in your quad. But switches are all the way up and away from you, and now your beeper's off. And when you plug in a battery, your beeper will be on, and you see that light up. So now the next thing we can put on here if we want to is flip over after crash, which is also turtle mode. I'm going to put that on auxiliary 4. And you should have already set up all your switches for this tutorial, right? So now I'm in aux 4, cool. And that's pretty much it for basic Betaflight modes setup. Now let's go down to the motors tab real quick. This is gonna be very important for you. And this is what we're talking about as far as prop direction, which prop goes on which motor. And typically they're set up to right turn rear. That's the standard type of quad setup. But in my case, if you look on the screen right here, it's a props out configuration. And what we mean by props out is that they turn outwards from the quad on the front of the quad. So that's what we call props out. A lot of quads do start to have this configuration on there. So the back right motor is going to turn to the left. Okay, and the way that we're going to test this before you do your first flight test is that you're going to take that piece of painter's tape now and go ahead and take a piece of it. We're going to plug in a battery, okay, and this gives you a visual. Okay, you could unplug Betaflight before you do that, plug in the cable again, and now we're connected to the radio, and you can hear my beeper there. And I can go down to the motors tab, and now I can test my motor direction. Now what we're doing is we're going to put a piece of tape on the very top of this motor, this right motor, and we're going to do each individual motor, number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, motor direction, you made a little piece of tape, you made a flag on it. Just take one long piece, bend it around the motor stem right here, make yourself a flag. Now we're just going to barely turn on each motor. So the way we do that is we go down to check I understand the risks. We're going to arm these motors now, and in this menu right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, this first motor will be motor number 1. You can see this up here, there's a 1000 here, and if I just slightly bring this up, you should see that motor spin up, and your little tape flag is going to move around, hopefully to the left. If that is wrong, we will need to switch that motor direction, okay? And we can do that inside the BL Heli configurator, BL Heli 32 configurator most likely for you. And that looks like it's rotating in the right direction. You're gonna do that for each motor. You're gonna put a piece of tape on there. I have also used like a little tiny 3-inch prop on a 5-inch quad like this. I'll take this off and just barely lightly put it on there. And I've also done this method as well outside, leaving that prop on very loose. I will momentarily arm the flight controller, arm the quad. So you have to be unplugged from Betaflight to be able to arm it, and just momentarily arming it, and it will make that prop spin around in a certain direction. Whichever direction it comes to a stop, that's the direction that it's rotating to. I don't recommend that for beginners, but that is another method, is the smaller 3-inch prop method on, say, a 5-inch quad, just for an example. But the painter's tape way is probably the most basic way to do that. So let's go ahead now and let's plug in the USB-C cable again, and we're gonna go back to Betaflight. And now we're gonna go down to OSD. We already turned on OSD in the configuration tab. If you remember from earlier, we can see that I have some things set up here. You can add all types of things here. You can grab on things and you can drag and drop. It's pretty intuitive. So you can put things on the screen wherever you want. Now, they won't apply until you actually press save over here on the bottom right. And now, with your battery plugged in, you can go ahead and put your goggles on and see where things are on the screen. If you don't see something up top or down below, maybe it's too high up on the screen in your goggles or too low. So we're gonna grab that and drag it down a little bit, and then maybe in your goggles view, it will come into view. So that's kind of important there, is make sure that everything is visible on the screen, all the things that you loaded for your particular OSD. Now, right now it's set to HD because this is a DJI O3 module, and I have my unit set to Imperial. That's United States standard. You can do British or metric, and again, it's set to HD. Now, if you're doing analog, you want to take it off HD and put it to NTSC or PAL. Most times people are setting it to auto, and that will change the whole look of this screen. See how much bigger everything gets? Now, that's an analog screen setup, but I'm going to go back to HD, and depending on what firmware you have, again, like, you will have this HD option or not. And again, over here on the left-hand side of the screen, this is where you can select pretty much any type of information you would like to have your flight controller display on your goggle screen. So ESC, RPM, RPM frequency, temperature, flight distance, if you have GPS on there. I don't have any GPS on this quad. This is purely a 5-inch freestyle quad. Home distance, all kinds of cool stuff. Now, typically what I put on there for my quad is the battery voltage right here, and the next thing I do is the goggle link quality, because I like to see how much goggle link, and that's up at the very top. You can also do the RX values as well. RSSI down here is a good thing to see, and also timer 2. I don't usually do timer 1 because timer 1 basically tells us how long we've had the quad plugged in until we unplug it. Now, timer 2 makes more sense to me because that's the fly time. So we're gonna display fly time on there, and you can see it actually says fly minutes on the OSD screen right there. So at this point, we're pretty good to go with our OSD. We have telemetry for all the various things that I would like to see on there. If you're flying long range FPV, you want to make sure you have individual battery cell voltage selected as well. So look in this list right here and find average cell voltage and turn that one on for long range guys. Because if you're flying Lions, you don't want to fly down past like around 3 volt per cell. That will be different on LiPos. So we're going to click save there. Now I'm showing both the average cell voltage and the main cell voltage for the entire battery. And that looks like it's currently at 16.8. That may be wrong, what you're seeing on your OSD screen, by the way. So now at this point, let's go ahead and click save again, and we're gonna go down to CLI. Now, this is a little bit of an older firmware, and I could probably update this if I wanted to. If you want to find out what version of firmware is on your quad, this is where you're gonna do that. And before we do that, and actually, yeah, let's do that. Let's do a dump first. We're gonna do a dump first. And one of the things that is valuable about a dump is that we can save all of these settings that we just did to the computer. So we're gonna go ahead and type in dump. And then you're going to see all the values come on the screen from what we've just done. So we're going to save that to a file. Go over to the bottom right and save to file, and go ahead and save that somewhere on your computer where you know where to find it later. So now we have a backup of all the things that we just did. So if you ever had to reflash your firmware, you could copy and paste it from the text file, drop it into this CLI, paste, and then hit return, and then type in save at the very end and hit return again, and it will apply it to your flight controller. So that's a nice option for backing up your files. So usually when I have a quad, that's what I do each time that I set up a new quad. Now, if you want to see what version it is, we can type in the word version here, hit return, and now we see we have Betaflight AT32 F435G on there, and that's Betaflight 4.50 August 10th, 2023. And it should show me a little more information there with the board manufacturer. The board name is the iFlight Blitz F435. So that is the version, the flight controller, and the basic information of what firmware is currently on this flight controller. Now, if you need to reflash your firmware, you're going to go out of Betaflight. This quad's going to reset because we have battery plugged in. You don't need to have a battery plugged in to flash your firmware. So if you're trying to update your firmware, you know, this would be kind of a last resort. Or if you get, sometimes when people get a brand new flight controller before they start a build, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to flash that flight controller to the newest version that is available in Betaflight. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to firmware flasher, we're going to unplug the cable, and they have an auto detect on here now, which is pretty cool. So if we plug it in for a sec here, we can go ahead and auto detect. So you see auto detect actually does work. iFlight Blitz F435, that's awesome. Now we can select the current version, which is July 2024. And if you don't want to do it that way, this is pretty nifty. They have a new option to do search. So if I know it's an iFlight flight controller, I can type in iFlight, and that will take me all the way down to the eyes instead of having to scroll all the way down through all these different flight controller firmwares. So that's just a shortcut for you. Type in iFlight, it's Blitz right there. Now we're going to go down here to the right, click Load Firmware Online. And what you're going to do is you're going to hold down your boot button on your flight controller, and you're going to plug in your USB cable. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to hit, while holding the boot button, we're going to click Flash Firmware, and that will start the process of flashing the firmware for you. Now, one of the other things that we're going to talk about in this tutorial is RPM filtering and PIDs. Now, most bind and fly quads come with some type of factory PID tune. So go ahead and turn on your radio. And at this point, we're gonna plug in a battery, take your USB cable, make sure you're on the welcome screen, plug in the USB cable again here, and we're gonna go ahead down to where it says PIDs. Okay, PID tuning. Now, these are the PID profiles that are loaded up on my Nazgul. So I'm just gonna leave everything set the same right there. I'm on profile 1, as you see up top, but we're gonna go over to filter settings right here. And I did mess around with what you see on the screen right here, and I changed things so that I would get a flag. A caution flag is up in the middle here. I'm going to show you how to get rid of that caution flag in a very easy to understand type of language, because for some reason RPM filtering can get very complicated, and I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible for you with your quad. Now, currently it is telling me that slider positions may cause a flyaway, motor damage, or unsafe craft behavior. So if I was to fly it right now, I'm at risk of doing all those different types of things. We don't want to have a flyaway or some unstable motor operation. So we're going to go down here and we're going to grab one of these sliders, and I'm gonna see right here on the far right, it says less filtering. I'm gonna drag it over to the center of the screen, back to default, and look what happened. We just lost that caution flag. So right now we're right in the middle of default RPM filtering for the gyro filter multiplier. That's awesome. So we're gonna leave it right there. We got rid of that flag. You can also turn on the D-term slider as well. if you want to, and that will just give it a little more filtering if you're having any types of strange vibrations and things like that. And the flight controller is now working with the ESCs in harmony, so that's really awesome. We're going to have a nice flying quad. I'm going to leave that one set to off just because that was the way the factory had it set up. But we're going to go ahead and click save here. And as far as anything down here on the bottom, you should be typically okay with the generic settings on this quad at this point for RPM filtering. We got rid of the flag and everything should be nice and smooth. So we'll go back to the PID profile settings now, and we are pretty much ready to go out and do our first flight test with this quad. So at this point, I know the motors will arm, the channel maps are working the right direction in the receiver. Double, triple check your channel maps that everything is moving the right direction and that your switches are properly working. Now, when you go out to test fly this quad for the first time, I know a lot of guys just goggle right up and do a test flight, but my best advice to you when you do that test flight is, like I showed you earlier in the modes tab, I set it to angle mode. Put it in angle mode so that it is stable. And after you've checked all your motor directions, you know your props are going the right direction, your axes are all right for your flight controller, your props are on, you're outdoors, you're in a wide open space, you want to get some distance from your quad, get yourself a landing pad, and go ahead and put your quad down, have your battery strapped down on the quad, and go ahead and take off in level flight. Just go up a foot or so, forward, back, left and right, and then land it. And that's my process every single time with every single new quad. I don't FPV first. I line of sight it first, only a foot or two off the ground, and I put it back down. Now, if you get in trouble, just click this arm switch right here and disarm it, and it will drop that back down to your flight pad. Now, a lot of times, if these motors are wrong, one of the biggest tips I can give you is that if you have a prop on wrong, or you have one of the motors spinning the wrong direction, that throws off the flight controller because it's putting extra dominant force on one side of the quad or the other. And that extra bit of force, that data goes back to the flight controller, and the flight controller says, I need to correct that. So what will happen sometimes is your quad will go full throttle and it will spin across the parking lot. I've had mine spin across the parking lot, almost hit my Prius and fly slam under it until I was able to hit the arm switch. And that happens so fast that you won't even have time to react. So it could have came at me and hit me. So that's one of the things that I want to warn you about on your first flight test, is gently hover it if you can. And again, if you have something going the wrong direction on a 5-inch, or even something as small as a 3-inch, it can violently flip across the ground. So you want to double, triple check with your painter's tape or your little tiny prop that you're putting on there. You're not tightening down the screw, by the way, you're just lightly putting on there. And sometimes I won't even put a nut on top of it, and if it flies off, that's fine. It's not gonna hurt anybody. But yeah, use a little 3-inch prop with the same type of diameter for the motor stem, and you should have all of your motors running the right direction. And that, at that point, you should be good to go. So I'm glad that I could do this updated version of a Betaflight tutorial for you. If this helped you get your quad flying, let me know in the comments down below. If I can help you any further, send me an email. If you need assistance, we also offer full setup for your quads. One of the few services in the United States that will do a full radio and quad and goggles setup. We have those on our website in different plans. I think it's $150 to start on dronecamps.com. So if you want me to do it, I'll do it for you. But otherwise, I hope this video helped you. And again, become my Patreon if you like this channel and you want to support our content here. I really appreciate that. But again, I'm Justin Davis, guys. I hope you're doing well and this tutorial helped you. Finally, an updated Betaflight tutorial for the FPV community. Guys, take care, and I will see you on the next one.